Ruth and his song. Okay, my dad was Carl McElroy.
Carl McElroy.
McElroy, his song. He never went by that. He always just Carl M. But he was always called Dutch. Nobody,
Dutch.
Probably he was in the army. Probably he was called Carl there. But in Benton Ridge, everybody knew him. He was called Dutch.
Do you have any idea where that nickname came from?
Well, yes. When he was little, he couldn't speak clearly, so the story was, and that's why they said he was Dutch, which is an old saying. And my mom was, you'll love these middle names, Ruth Idell Buckingham. I was the oldest. Then Kyle Maynard, another odd middle name. He was born 22 months after I was. He just passed away Ethan was born in
2011, that's right.
So Kyle passed away in 2010. My sister, who is 10 years younger than I am, Brenda Carroll, his song Shapiro.
Shapiro's her married name? Or?
Yeah, Shapiro
Okay.
was her married name. She's been divorced for 20, well, more than that, maybe 30 years. But she was 10 years younger than me. We all grew up in Benton Ridge, Ohio.
Early memories, and tell what was it like growing up, and give me the year and that sort of thing, and what it was like growing up.
I was born in 39. So my dad was in the army in what would have been, I was 4 or 5 years old. So 45, 46 along in there, he was in the army. At that time, Brenda wasn't born yet. Mom and Kyle and I, she took us down to Leipzig, where her parents lived, and we lived in an apartment for a year or so while Dad was in the army.
Now, do you know where he was deployed to, or?
Yeah, he was on the Burma Road in India, between India and China, I guess, but on the Burma Road. If you ever see an old war movie with the Burma Road, he was not in fighting. He was a mechanic, worked on trucks, but never saw any action. But he was in the army for 3 years.
And was that during World War II as well?
Yeah.
And so he was over in India during World War II?
Yeah.
Okay.
And he was deployed left in Lima, Ohio to go to California. When he was in California, Mom took Kyle and I, we went by train to California to stay there for, I don't know whether it was a year, 6 months, whatever, stay there until he was sent overseas.
So he was at like a base there or whatever, and you guys went by train?
Yeah, by train.
And how old were you then?
Oh, I would have been, if I was born in 39, probably 5 years old at the most. Okay.
So that's probably some of your earliest memories then are from out in California. Yeah. Were your parents Christians?
My mom was, but my dad wasn't until, oh gosh, he was 2 when David was 2 when Dad died. So 2 years before that, we lived in Norwalk, Ohio, and the pastor there, Pastor Lunny, David Lunny, Wayne took him to Toledo, to Medical College of Ohio. Dad had a brain tumor, and he had cancer that started, they didn't know where, from his stomach. He'd been a smoker, but he ended up with a brain tumor. But he became receptive to listening about Christianity. And so Wayne said, Dutch, how about I bring our pastor up and talk to you? And he said, oh, okay. One of those kinds, you know. But Pastor Lunny went up with Wayne, and I think probably, I knew I was there, and I think probably Jeff and Kelly. But he became a Christian, almost deathbed Christian.
Right.
But he became a Christian. He had a salty language, and And I can remember Mom saying, Dodge, don't talk like that. But when when Jeff and Kelly were small, my dad's personality changed quite a bit, and he never swore around them.
And was that
swore? He wasn't mean. It was just, that was the way he talked.
right?
That was it. But around Jeff and Kelly, he didn't do that.
And you'd have to ask him. That was just he.
Oh yeah, he
knew better.
If we'd have asked, it might not have changed. He just didn't do it around them.
And what about your mom then? Just about her in general. What was her disposition?
She was servant person, I guess I'll say. Your mom and Jeff used to, if I'd be around and I would say, do you want a piece of pie? And they'd say no, and I said, yeah, you have a piece of pie. It was, okay, Grandma, piss on.
Right.
Because she always, it was her bent to try to serve people and make them feel better. She was a very good woman, much more of a housewife than I've ever been. She and my sister both loved flowers, they loved cleaning, and I wasn't like that. Mom didn't have a lot of self-confidence, I'll put it that way. And I don't think her and Dad got along fine, but I don't think his personality helped her have any self-confidence. In late years, and I guess mainly after Dad was gone, she learned she had to take care of herself more then.
So what kind of things did you guys do together when you were young? You
as
and
a
your
family?
As a family, yeah.
Very little. That's why it makes me feel so good to see how your family is, and Jeff's. My family did nothing. Back in those days, the men of the family, when they'd get together, uncles, would play euchre, mostly. The women would sit around and talk. We did go on a couple, I remember one specifically, trip up into, must have been northern Michigan, to a cabin with my aunt and uncle. That's the only family vacation I remember. Now when we went to Tansy, Mom and Dad went down there very early on, maybe once, because we've got a picture of Dad, I think, with you and Kyle on the boat down there. But we didn't do things together. My dad would go, Kyle played sports, and Dad would go to the games, go home. Kyle would come in later, and there was no discussion about the games or nothing. My mom sort of went overboard trying to make things more fun, more interesting. She went to church, Dad didn't. Dad always had the potatoes peeled for the Sunday meal, but he didn't go to church. And by the time he became a Christian, he was in bed and riddled with cancer and couldn't go.
Now, did the kids, were you at church with Mom, or were you home with
No,
with
we
Dad?
went. Kyle didn't go. My brother didn't go, and that really bothered Mom. But I went, and then when Brenda was old enough to go, she was involved with the youth group. I guess that's what they called it then. But Dad never. I don't remember him ever going. If one of us was in a program at school, he would go for that and then go home that day. But there was never any, like you guys sit around and talk about things. That my family wasn't that way.
Now, how much of that do you think was just your family versus times have changed a lot since then too?
A lot of it was the times, but my aunt and uncle, Dad's brother, their family was more conversive with each other.
Oh.
But a lot of it, you're right, a lot of it was the times. Yeah. Well, and I learned what family could be like from Wayne and his family. They were total opposite of my family. Wayne's dad, John, would go to all of Wayne's games. They would talk about things afterwards. there were 4 kids in the family, and they did things together. Total opposite.
Is there any story on meeting Wayne and, you know, kind of how
See,
you guys
we all went to the same high school.
high school sweethearts then, or what?
No, not really. He and Kyle were friends, and it just evolved.
And then, how old were you when you guys got married?
19. Too young, but
Sorry, I can't help but laugh at that one.
that's okay. And I was talking, I don't know, somebody I met later in life, maybe Betty in Cincinnati, somebody anyway, and they said, well, as young as he died, aren't you glad you started out that soon? I said, yeah. If I look at it like that, I say, well, okay, maybe that's why.
Yeah, what was it like, I guess, being a mom for the first time, and what was that experience?
That I can't even answer, because I can't put myself back there to even think about it, honestly.
So Kim and I were like, what did we even do before we had kids?
Yeah.
It's tough to remember,
Yeah.
you know, the difference, and it just becomes...
And then all of a sudden, and when you bring grandkids into the picture, Wayne and I's life with my mom and dad changed, because you've got another factor there. You've got 2 little kids around, or 1 and then 2. So that helped my family become more family-ish.
So tell me more about Wayne's family and his siblings and parents, and what you saw in them from a family
Don
perspective.
and John, his parents, had 4 kids. Weston was the oldest, then Martha, then Wayne, then Mary. So they had boy, girl, boy, girl. They were, John drove a, I don't even know if they do that anymore, oil truck that delivered heating oil to farm, but they lived on a farm, but John drove a truck. So they weren't technically farmers, but Wayne grew up on a farm. And there's a different, even back then, there's a different, not mentality, but that's the only word I can think of, with kids that grew up in a farm, as opposed to Kyle and I, who grew up in the big town of Benton Ridge, which was 400 people maybe. For Kyle, my dad was a construction worker, and when Dad tried to give Kyle a job, they didn't get along, and so just nothing worked for them. With Wayne and his dad and his brother, you know, they were out there working on his older brother, was his only brother, pretty much farmed the property as they were high school age. So they worked together, even the girls. They're just, to say we were city kids is funny, but we lived in a town and they lived out on the farm, and there was a difference. He'd grown up in the church, but their church, you can cut this out later too, their church was more of a social club.
Okay.
It wasn't a church. And he didn't become a Christian until we lived in Norwalk, where Jeff and Kelly they went to high school. They both graduated from Norwalk. And it was probably when they were early high school years, before Wayne became a Christian. And the man who, when Kim's grandfather died, Paul Dixon, he is the one that had the evangelistic services at Norwalk Church when Wayne became a Christian.
So he had been around the church, but that was when he really became a Christian.
And he and I and the kids had gone to church. This is, you might want to cut this one out too. Well, he laughed about it later. We lived in Indianapolis, and I was going to go to church, take Jeff and Kelly, and he just didn't want to go. I don't remember the circumstances, but we were sitting in church, and you could see out the windows. Here he comes walking up the sidewalk, and came and got in beside us at church.
Now, was that after Dixon, or that was before?
Oh, way before.
Okay. So this was kind of his mentality beforehand, like, fine, I'll do it if I have to.
Yes.
But then afterwards, he was...
And he knew he should go because of the kids, if nothing else. But I can in my mind still see him walking, and we laughed about it many a time. So he knew he was wrong, But he was the kind, if he made a mistake and did something wrong, he would admit it.
So do you have, you mentioned you didn't have many trips or anything like that when you were a kid. Do you have any memories of vacations or any memories that stand
Not
out with
until we
the
started
five of
going
you or
to,
four of you?
Tansy, when we bought that undeveloped lot down in Tansy. From then on, and David would have been maybe only year and a half. So that was when we lived in Norwalk, and by then is when Wayne became very good friends with Gordon Schechterly, Dale's dad, and he was the one that was very influential in Wayne becoming a Christian. But they were very good friends of ours and went to Tansy with us. But we didn't have a lot of money then. We didn't go, I don't know where we'd have gone on vacation if we'd have had the money, frankly. But once he started going to Tansy, he loved it down there. Well, we all liked it.
Mm-hmm. So what did Wayne do for a living?
He started out at RCA in Findlay, just as a foreman in the factory. But the man that he worked for, I don't remember how long, maybe 2 or 3 years at the longest, was taken out to Indianapolis to the RCA factory or plant out there. So he took Wayne and another guy from Findlay out there, and that's when we moved to Indianapolis. It became a very stressful situation, so he ended up leaving there, and he went to work for the company that he finally worked for in Norwalk. But he ended up, I don't remember his title, but he was plant manager of the factory. It's not good to call it a factory, the plant in Norwalk. He was very good, had a very, very good business head, but as importantly as that, he was a good people person. He always said, I don't have to know how to do everything, I just have to have good people working for me.
And from what I know of him, seems like he was I don't know if natural is the right word, but he was a natural leader.
Yes, he was. Yeah.
And you think it's that people like what made him a good leader, you think?
I don't know, just that was just him.
Yeah.
His dad was somewhat that way, but John was never out in a business setting. Wayne just could read people. He just was very good with people.
What's that?
The first time it got to be very noticeable sort of surprised me, because he wasn't the kind of personality that you would expect that would get stressed. But the job was very, very stressful. And each time that when we moved to Atlanta, that was not stress that sent him down there. That was because he had to move with the company to keep his job. But once we got in Atlanta, and the boss, the man that he worked for, first of all, he had no respect for, and things had changed to the point, and he was traveling back and forth between Atlanta and Illinois, wherever University of Illinois is, to get his MBA. And he would be gone every weekend or every other weekend, and it became very stressful. So then he started contacting headhunters and ended up leaving because of stress. But to get us to Atlanta wasn't stress, but to get us to Indianapolis eventually was. Jeff was basic personality athlete. I mean, he played baseball, he played basketball, he played football, and it would go from one sport to the other almost year round. And when I say poor Kelly got drug around, we always allowed her to take a friend to the games with us, because we would drive, and Sherry Boards, which you probably heard your mom talk about, her parents didn't go to the games, so Sherry would go with Kelly. But that was our livelihood, which was looking back, it wasn't really fair to David or Kelly that much time was spent We always went to probably every sport, every game he ever played. And the baseball was like a summer league. It wasn't through the school. I don't remember what it was called. But we would always make sure that if Kelly wanted to go, she was old enough to stay home if she wanted to. But that was our activity. We had moved. We had gone from Norwalk to Terre Haute, and the company that Wayne worked for was selling out, being bought out. And so he ended up going to keep his job, he had to go to Atlanta. And Jeff had worked for, I guess he'd worked at the plant for a while, but anyway, he followed us to Atlanta, and he got a job, I think at a Kroger distribution center, something like that, and met a guy named Tony Money, and Tony Money, and Tony's wife, Rachel, I think her was the name, and Zan were friends. So by meeting Tony, and they would do things together, that's how he met Zan. Okay. We were in Atlanta too very long, and Wayne left that company because of stress, and we moved to Antioch, Illinois. So Zan had only been around, they were married before we moved away, so maybe a year or so before we moved to Antioch, Illinois. Jeff had ended up, I don't remember how he got there, but he ended up in Bloomington, Indiana, working for maybe RCA? I don't remember. It might have been. But Kyle was born when they lived in Bloomington, Indiana. And then she didn't like being up north, and so they ended up going back down to Atlanta. Okay. She was more, I was going to say more introverted than Jeff. Jeff wasn't an extrovert, he just had the outlet of sports, made a difference. When Kelly was in maybe junior, maybe senior year, anyway, they had a work-study program, and she could work in an office for part of their, I don't know, it was daily, but anyway, she loved that. And when we ended up moving to Terre Haute, she stayed in Norwalk and roomed with a girl because she had that job and she wanted to stay there. She was a lot like me, she never had a lot of hobbies. And today, to date, if I wasn't working, I'd be lost. She didn't have that outlet. She could have, but she chose to stay home and raise you kids.
Yeah, I was gonna say, I think her hobby is, to her credit, is family.
Yes.
And
yes.
Everything she does with
yes.
us. So.
And there's where she and I differ. She is a much better, you don't need to cut this out, she is a much better mother and more attentive to you guys than I ever was to my kids. When I first started working, my mom was around and she took care of Jeff and Kelly. And it was easy for me to go off and go to work because my mom had the kids. Kelly didn't have that, and I don't know that, I think she would have been more of a person to stay home with her kids anyway. When we moved to Terre Haute, Kelly stayed in Norwalk maybe, I don't know, 2 or 3 months maybe, and she decided that she didn't want to stay out there in Norwalk, so she came to Terre Haute to live with us, and she went to work at the TV station in Terre Haute, and she was working with a girl, I can picture her, but I don't remember her name, that I think that girl's boyfriend knew Mark. And so, like Jeff meeting Zan through a friend, Kelly met Mark through whatever this girl's name was. and they would go to Maurizio's when Mark would be working, and she got acquainted with him there. You start calling me Ruthie early, but I doubt that he did when he first came around. But I honestly don't remember. But he is the first one to start calling me Ruthie, yeah. When Mark and Kelly were married, probably within a month is when we had to move to Atlanta. So they were left in, they didn't live in Terre Haute, they lived down in Cincinnati, in Cleves. So they were down there with neither family around.
And then last, tell me about David. What was he like growing up?
He was a good kid, very good student. When we moved to Terre Haute, Mark would appreciate this more than you. David was in maybe 3rd grade. He'd come home and he said, well, I use better English than those kids there. You can cut that out or not, that's up to you. We've laughed about that different times. He said, well, I did. And they were just, not hicks, they just Terre Haute.
Yeah.
But David was a lot like Kelly. He didn't have hobbies, didn't like sports. The thing that he liked best in school was, took a German class. I don't know, it was 3 years or 2 years, but he ended up going to Germany with a German club, I guess it was. That he really enjoyed, and that was about the only thing I remember ever seeing him. That and when he worked at a pet store when we lived in Antioch, and animals.
About Star Wars. You remember him liking Star Wars?
Oh yeah. Now Wayne took him to, I forget where we would have lived, probably Terre Haute, when the big, I don't know, was the first one come out? What year?
1977 was the first one.
Well, he was, yeah, that would have probably been the first one, because he was born in 70. So we probably lived in Terre Haute, and oh yeah, Wayne took him, and amusement parks, that was David's thing, and Wayne loved it. So that was the main thing they had in common.
So they'd go to amusement parks together?
Oh yeah.
So
there was Great Flags.
Six Flags?
Six Flags? Great America in near Antioch, Illinois. And David worked there for one summer and loved it. But yeah, Wayne loved roller coasters. He and David had gone for a bike ride. Maybe it was a Sunday afternoon, maybe no more than a mile. They'd ridden over to the school that David had gone to, and we moved up there. And by the time they got there, Wayne was having pains, and Sunday afternoon, and there was nobody in the school. There was houses, a few houses along on the other side, and David rode the bike home to get me, and we went back. I went back over, and I don't even remember how we got to somebody to call. We'd only lived there 6 weeks. I don't know where the nearest hospital, even Antioch didn't have a hospital. I didn't know anything about it. And I don't remember how we got a hold of the person that finally ended up helping us. I'm trying to think I can't remember how much input he had in what we were doing. We just knew that we had to get him in an ambulance, and found out that the nearest hospital was maybe 20 miles, 15 miles, something like that. When they got him to the hospital, that was Sunday afternoon, that night, Sunday night late, I can remember them coming and asking for permission to give him a experimental, or a drug that was very new. I don't know about experimental, a very new drug. I used to know the name of it, and I don't remember anymore. And of course I said yes, if it'll help. So then the next day, or I don't know if they kept him there a day or two, they flew him by helicopter to St. Luke's in Milwaukee, which was known as a heart hospital for that area. And he was there I think he was in the hospital 3 weeks the first time.
So this was all the first time
Yeah.
that he had, okay.
Yeah. Yeah.
All right.
And then that was June of 84. And he lived till, he was in there probably at least 3 weeks. And then home. Oh, I don't remember how long, but he kept having to go back into what was the local hospital, not in Antioch, but Gurnee, Illinois. And maybe go in for a couple days until they, I don't know, until they could get him regulated again. But he only ever had the one heart attack. But then when he kept getting worse, didn't get better, is when they decided to do the heart transplant. And that they did in St. Luke's in Milwaukee.
Now what happened with that?
He was above the age to be put on a heart list. And conditions were bad enough, I guess, to take a heart from, he wasn't priority on the heart list, I guess I'll say.
That's surprising to me since he was so young at the time.
Well, but that massive heart attack he had, his whole system, I guess, they probably knew it would be risky to put a good heart in his body.
Okay.
Because when he had the heart transplant, the one doctor said that the heart worked, but the rest of his body had gone through so much that his other organs couldn't sustain the heart. But the man that he got the heart from was a sign painter in Milwaukee, and he had fallen and was on life support, and so that was the heart that they transplanted into Wayne on a Monday, I think it was, and by Wednesday or Thursday, I think Wednesday, they knew it wasn't gonna work.
So did he go under for the surgery and then never come out again, or?
No, they had already done, well, yes. Yeah, he knew they were gonna do the heart transplant. He came through it, and we were able to go in and, he knew we were there, but to have any conversation, we never did.
So tell me about that time and the emotions in the family, because he was so young. I remember thinking when I was 5, like, oh, he was old,
Yeah.
you know.
Oh,
but
yeah.
now I realize how incredibly young
Yeah.
he was, and sounds like although it was a tough situation, I'm sure you guys were hopeful that the heart transplant would work. So what were the emotions like?
Doctor that did the heart transplant, I don't know his name now, the one that was well known for heart transplants, had just given a lecture at St. Luke's that week prior. And so we knew it was a good heart hospital. As far as whether to say we had a lot of anticipation that he would live through it, I don't know that we even had time to go there in our thinking. The only thing I remember him saying was, unless the light falls off the ceiling and hits me, I don't want anybody suing anybody. So, if this doesn't work, don't think you're going to sue, which we wouldn't have anyway. But unless the light falls and
Right.
hits me, no lawsuits.
So what was it like in the weeks after? And David was 10, you said, or
No, he was 16.
16. Okay, sorry.
Because
Yeah.
Wayne had just helped him. Well, I had helped David learn to drive, but so did Wayne. But David had just got his driver's license, and now I don't remember if it was after Wayne died or before. But Wayne was very instrumental in teaching David to drive, and when he took his test, he passed it. But he was, I think he would have been going in his junior year of high school. And this was in June. Jeff and Zan were still in Bloomington. And they came up, and your mom didn't get to come. When was it? She wasn't there for maybe when he had the heart attack, she didn't come because you were just a baby. But for the transplant surgery, they were all there. Zan chose to stay at the house with you and Kyle. And we all said, well, you don't need to if you want to come, but that was her preference. And that was very helpful to the rest of us. At the time, none of that goes through your head. And I'm sort of a personality that says, that's what I was dealt, so I have to make it go. And David was a young teenager, so if nothing else, I had to be there for him. And I stayed in Antioch until he graduated from high school, and then it's when I moved down to Hidden Valley, in Indiana, Lawrenceburg. I can tell you right where I was when Kennedy was shot and the 9/11. Now, a lot of difference in ages, but for Kennedy, we still lived in Findlay. I worked at RCA in the office. Wayne was in the factory then, a foreman in the factory. And then 9/11, we lived in Arizona. And Charlie had gone to work. He worked as a maintenance man in a nursing home, restroom, whatever they called it. And he had just gotten to work, I think, and somebody had a TV on. And he called home and said, turn the TV on. So that, in Arizona, that was like 6 or 6:30 in the morning.
Moon landing, anything like that when you were growing up?
Yeah.
What else do you remember?
That, Jeff and Kelly, was before David was born. We had gone, I don't know where we lived, maybe still in Findlay area, but we had gone on what was one of our short vacations down through Kentucky, wherever there's locks down there, and I don't remember the area. But anyway, we had gone down there, and I remember watching whatever was on TV at the time in a motel, and Jeff and Kelly would have been, what year was it?
I think it was 69. It's moon landing.
So Kelly was born in 60, and Jeff was born in 58, so that's other than that, I don't remember any historical.
Yeah.
If you remember any, you'll have to ask me. No, like I said, until Wayne and I were married, and his family was involved. Kyle and I never did anything together. Brenda was she was 10 years younger than me, 9.5. So we did nothing. The only thing that we ever did as family, extended family, when my dad's sister and her husband, and then his brother and his wife, the three would get together, and we would, usually at our place, because we had a bigger lawn, and they would play croquet, make homemade ice cream. Then the men would go play euchre, and the women would sit and talk. They didn't, and the women didn't play cards with the men, not back then. They weren't allowed to.
So what was your role in that as a kid? I mean, would you talk with women? Would you just be running around playing, or what?
I had two cousins that were close to my age, So other than spending time with them, we didn't do anything. It's not like, back then, we didn't do like people do now, I guess. Okay, you can cut this part out. Tell him he better be good or he's not going to get any more answers.
Yeah, how about, what kind of toys did you play with?
Yeah, did you have any hobbies or anything like that? What did you?
I don't remember even having toys, to tell you the truth. The earliest memories I have of Christmas is helping Mom prepare for Brenda's Christmas so she could be surprised, because she was almost 10 years younger than me. Not that we didn't get presents, but we were just not a family that did much together at all.
That's
Now-
fair.
Now, Wayne's family was, like I told you, they were totally opposite. They were a family. You know, Mark wasn't around too long before, well, Mark and Kelly were married, and then we moved to Atlanta right away. And then when we went back up to Antioch, Mark and Kelly were still down in Cleves area, I think. They would golf, not often because we weren't in close proximity to each other. But I know Wayne thought a lot of him, no more than he got to know him. Mary Lou would have had a good time visiting with each other. I always think she was a great lady. And I think people probably would think Wayne was a great man.
It's a large nursing home
Yeah,
or
up
something like
in
that.
Findlay, yeah.
And at that time she didn't, I think, she may not even know who you were at that time.
No, I don't think she did at least the last year that she was alive, maybe last 2 years. When I would go, and one time I went specifically to do this, to see the response. I went in, visited with her, left and was gone for a couple hours, went visited other people, came back to see if there would be any recognition whatsoever that I had been there. There wasn't. The only time there was any, when Charlie and I were married, we went up to Findlay in the fall, and he said something about going in, and I said, no, I'd rather you just remember Mom like she was. So I went in, and she was sitting there in a wheelchair, and I said, she didn't recognize me, I know, but I said, Mom, you don't have to worry about me anymore. Charlie's gonna take care of me. And she looked right straight up into my face, just that second. There was recognition of what I had said to her, and then it was gone. And that would have been, well, she died in January, right after New Year's, so that would have been 3 or 4 months before she died.
How old was she when she died? Out of curiosity.
Oh gosh, she was born in 15, so she died, and we were married in 98. She died in 98.
Okay.
So 83?
Okay.
83? You know how old I'm going to be in February? Wayne died in 85. 86, I went on a trip to China and Hong Kong with a lady that I worked with. Mom came up to stay with David, and Jeff and Zan came up like on one of the weekends or sometime. I found out later, my mom was a great person for flowers, her and Brenda both. Any kind of flower she could make grow. I found out later that she was out in front of the house pulling up tulips, and they have a bulb, and throwing them away. And when I heard that, I knew right then her mind had started to go. There's that, my heavens, she knew flowers inside and out, knew how to take care of them, but she was digging them up. So that would have been 86, and she died, well, in 98.
That's a long time. That'd be hard to
Yeah.
watch and
Yeah.
they say with Alzheimer's patients is less about they kind of die twice. Once when they
Oh, yeah.
lose their, all their
Yeah.
facilities, and then another time for real or physically.
And she went back down. She lived down by Brenda at the time in Florida, and then she was down there for I don't know how many years, few. Then she had come back up to Findlay, and that's when she really got bad, and we had to put her in that nursing home that you have memory of. He moved they had been on a farm in the country, and I think probably 5th or 6th grade, maybe I was, when they moved into town. And his dad was one of 10, 11 kids. So that was a big family around Baton Rouge. So, I knew most of his family, but for his parents, Dorothy and Luther, to move into town was probably late, what we would call middle school now. But we went, we all went to the same high school. Margaret, his sister, and I were good friends. They went to the same church that my mom and I went to. So it was just like, somebody, I guess Betty that I worked with in Cincinnati, said something about Charlie, and I said, well, if it was somebody new, somebody I didn't know, I wouldn't be here contemplating this. But it's just like, I'd known him all my life. Now, there'd been 40 years we didn't see each other, probably at least, but I knew his family, I knew him, I knew of him, how he grew up and all that, so it wasn't like a stranger. His dad died in, I guess it would have been 96, and Margaret called me, because when I would go to Findlay, I would always go visit Dorothy and Luther, because they were good friends of my mom and dad, and I would visit Margaret, so, there was contact there. Charlie lived in Michigan, so I never saw him, but when their dad died, Margaret called me and said, I just want you to know that Dad died. And I said, well, I'm going to ask at work. I will be there for the funeral, because I lived in Cincinnati then. So I went to the funeral, and then that's the first I had seen Charlie in probably 40 years. Probably. Long time. And he, which I didn't know at the time, was in the process of leaving his wife and getting a divorce, which I didn't know at the time, but found out later. Because Margaret and I had kept in touch, but not close. And we just never talked about him, so I didn't know. I knew where he lived, and that was about it. I knew he lived in that state up north. Was that what you call it?
Yeah, that's good.
Yeah, he asked Margaret if she would give him my address so he could write to me. And I said, and she asked me, it was all right. And I said, yeah, it's okay. And so in the letter, he said that he was leaving Michigan, and his mom lived near Findlay in Macomb, so he was going to come down and live with his mom for a while. And at the time, Scott, that just passed away, and his one brother Steve had a business in Cincinnati. They sold like disc TV, the disc that you would, if you don't have cable, that kind of, I don't know if there's another term for it.
Satellite dish or?
Yeah,
okay.
They sold those. They had a business down there. So he said, well, I'm gonna come down, and Scott was probably his, Scott and Steve both were his favorite nephews. And he had a lot more in common with them than he did his own boys. Sad to say, but it was true. But he came down and was get together with them, and finally he said, could I come over and visit? And I said, yeah. I was bored with my job. I'd been there 6 years, and I didn't want to move up here, but I didn't want to stay in the job that I had, and I liked my house. I didn't really need to move, but to get a better job in Cincinnati, I'd had to go over on the Kings Island side of town. That's where all the business were. And so I was bored with that part of my life. Other than that, I wasn't looking to change my life at all. And if, like I told this, my friend Betty, if it hadn't been somebody that I knew or knew of and knew the family, I wouldn't have been interested at all. When we lived in Norwalk is when he became a Christian, and Paul Dixon was the one. And when we were in Atlanta, he would have to go out on business men from work on business meetings. And before he became a Christian, he would have a drink or two at dinner. He came home one night, and from having dinner with, I know the guy, I don't remember his title, but I know who he was having dinner with, and he said, I just decided it was time to make a stand, and I didn't have a drink. And he said, whatever his name was, said, aren't you drinking tonight? And he said, I told him why I'm not drinking. So now these days, that wouldn't be an issue as much as it was back then, maybe. I mean, we're talking 25 years ago. But he needed to make a stand. In his mind, he wanted to make a stand and say, this is why I'm not having a drink. And wine was never, he didn't drink a lot, but I don't think he hardly ever had beer around the house. Probably because his dad, not that his dad was against it, his dad just didn't drink, just didn't have any around. My dad didn't either, only when he would get together, they would have his brother-in-law and his brother would come and they'd have a get together, then they would have some beer. Other than that, it was more of an unusual thing back then than usual like it is now. He was only 61. David was 2 years old, so it would have been 1972. And Dad had ended up having a brain tumor. He had cancer, and it ended up in his brain. They always thought because he was a smoker that it probably started in his lungs, but by that time they didn't know where it started. He was diagnosed in early January and died in July. Early July. Well, we were in Tennessee. Kelly and I were just talking about this the other day. We were in Tennessee, and we always had to go over the 4th of July because that's when Wayne's plant had shut down. So we were down there when Dad died. We were talking about cell phones. They had to call the office at Tansy. They had to come get us, give us a message, and then Wayne had to go back, or he went over and called to find out why they were calling us. No cell phones back then. Wayne, we moved because of his work. With Charlie he would have been a traveler. But we started out when we were married, we lived in Cincinnati, and I think I was probably as much the cause of moving as he was. I just thought maybe it would be better if he didn't move into my house. Maybe he would like it better, have a neutral place. Well, we ended up in Apple Valley, up by Mount Vernon, and I did not like that at all. And at that time, Jeff said they were heavy in real estate, and he said, if you guys would want to consider coming to Atlanta, Charlie could have all kinds of work fixing up houses that they might have listed, or he could get him work. And I had always liked Atlanta. The first time I lived there, I really liked it. So we ended up going to Atlanta because of that. And Atlanta weather, the humidity and all that didn't agree with Charlie at all. And he started having problems with his immune system from all the humidity, the mold, the pollen, whatever. So that's when and by then the work had dwindled away from Jeff and Zan's business. So that's how we ended up going to Arizona, because he said, if I'm going to go someplace for my health, and what I didn't realize at the time, he loved it in the Southwest, because he was in the Air Force in New Mexico. And if his wife at the time would have been agreeable, he would have stayed out there, but she wasn't agreeable. But he loved the Southwest. So we ended up going back out to Arizona. I didn't like it because I was too far away from family. So when we were ready to leave there, I said, well, he didn't want to go to Findlay. I said, what about Tennessee? We'd always liked Tennessee, and that's sort of local between all of our families. And we built a house. He got a job with the maintenance company there. And I don't know whether we were there 2 years or 3, in that company, they started laying off. So he was without a job. So, where did we end up? Up here by Kelly and Mark and the boys.
Well, we've enjoyed it. We've enjoyed your presence up here.
So have I. Now, at that time, if he would have wanted to go to Findlay, I would have been agreeable to that, because, we had friends up there. Friends we went to school with. We used to get together with them after we moved here. But he didn't really want to live in Findlay, so we ended up here, which turned out to be fine. So
that's all we are to you? Fine? That's all we are to you? Fine?
Just fine. Well, really finer than normal. How about that?
I'll take it.
Okay. We did not have a family.
Mm-hmm.
We were well provided for, but we had no communication as far as a family. It was Mom and I, and my dad was always, like Charlie, always busy working, doing something. It just was not dysfunctional. It just wasn't a close family. The house that we grew up in, Kyle and Brenda and I, my mom and dad bought it for $200. I remember them telling that. And I don't remember who they bought it from, but my dad grew up in Benton Ridge, so back then you pretty much stayed close to where you grew up. They bought that house, and Dad was a fixer-upper like Charlie, so that whole house was remodeled inside out, all by Dad, and if he needed a little bit of help, his brother would help him, but mostly Dad did everything. Not fancy, but comfortable.
Have you been back to that house recently?
Last time Charlie and I were in Benton, we drove down that street, because he lived 2 doors up from us. And Mom and Dad, the last probably 4 or 5 years that Dad lived, he got this bug to buy a mobile home, but it was a stationary one, and he had built a 3-car garage right next to it and built on a laundry room, and so they moved out of the house that was like from John's place over that far away from where we grew up, and that was where they lived when he died. Now Mom would have chosen to stay in the house, but Dad, he just for some reason got this bug that he wanted something different. Kelly and I are a lot alike in a lot of ways, but that's one way that we are not alike. When Jeff and Kelly were little, I started working, and my mom watched them. So it was very easy for me to go off and go to work, because Mom had the kids, and I thoroughly enjoyed working. The one job that Kelly had in Cincinnati as a secretary of church she enjoyed that. And Zach and Brady were little. It was hard though, having she had to take her kids to a sitter. My mom came to the house, got the kids, took care of them. I went off to work and it was easy for me. I consider Kelly a far better mother to her family than I was. For me to have to stop working and be home full time would have been hard for me. When we lived in Norwalk, I didn't work for maybe a year, and finally I decided I wanted to go to work, and David had to go to a sitter, and that was a little bit hard for me because Jeff and Kelly I didn't have that situation with them, but I worked anyway. So I consider Kelly a better mother, and the way this family all gets together and does things together is so totally opposite of the way I grew up. Now, I told him, Wayne's family, they were more like you guys do. They would get together, they would have a good time. Charlie's family didn't. His in a very dysfunctional home life. But with Wayne's, it was very much like you guys do. Mine wasn't that way.
I don't place any judgment value on like you going to work and having someone else take care of your children. I don't see that as being any better or worse of a mom. And as far
Really?
as no, I don't. I think
Maybe,
women that go and work there, I don't see them as any less of a mother, a good mother to their children, just because
well,
they.
maybe I say that because I feel a little guilty that I didn't stay home with the kids, but at the time, and I have to say that we needed the money. Wayne didn't make good money starting out. He ended up doing great, but starting out, we needed the money, and my mom knew that, and I never paid her and she wouldn't have taken anything for watching the kids.
Mm-hmm.
So that part didn't factor into it, but at that point, we needed my income, and that, from there on, there's times we didn't need it, but by then I really enjoy working, or I wouldn't be working at 81 years old.